I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and welcome to the New York Times Close-Up. It's been another bewildering week. In a moment, my Times colleague, Op-Ed columnist Bret Stephens, will help us navigate those choppy waters. Then Times Metro reporter and columnist Corey Kilgannon tells us about the quest to have Hart Island, the final resting place for the disenfranchised, open to the public. He's joined by their advocate, Melinda Hunt, the founder of the Hart Island Project. My Times colleagues discuss some of the key issues of the week on the backstory, and I'll offer some additional thoughts on Coda. But first, Op-Ed columnist Bret Stephens of the New York Times. Bret, we haven't seen too many profiles of courage in the Congress. When is it time for members of the president's own staff, members of the staff who clearly don't agree with him, to get up and say, it's enough, I resign, I'm calling it quits, and I'm going to stand up and say so?
Well, I had a conversation on just that very subject a few days ago with Cy Vance, who's the Manhattan DA, whose father, also Cy Vance, was Jimmy Carter's Secretary of State until he resigned in protest of the Carter administration's policies, particularly with respect to Iran in 1980. A very difficult decision. Carter was facing a challenge for the nomination. The country was in a bad way, but he felt he no longer had the ear of the president. He felt that he no longer was could accept the president's policies and defend them publicly. And at that point, he made a principled decision to step down from the job he had spent his entire career working his way up to. And I think that's a pretty good benchmark for when high public officials should step down. I've known John Bolton for many years. John Bolton has been nothing if not unequivocal about his opposition to, for example, negotiations with North Korea of the kind that the president is eagerly undertaking. I've known Mike Pompeo for a long time. He has been clear that Russia is an enemy of the United States and has to be treated in an adversarial fashion. So clearly both men are no longer advocating policies to which they feel any loyalty beyond perhaps the loyalty to a boss. And I think that's the moment when they should step down and step aside for someone who agrees with the president, right or wrong.
At what point, though, do you rationalize and say, at least when I'm there, I have the president's ear, maybe I can be a modulating influence. If I walk away, maybe there'll be someone even worse.
Well, some French leader, whether it was Charles de Gaulle or Clemenceau, said the graveyards are filled with indispensable men. And the kind of the conceit of après moi le deluge is sort of universal. I think the problem you have now is that instead of cleaning up after the president, people like Bolton and Pompeo are covering up for the president. They are trying to make an indefensible policy look better than it is. And I think at that point they're doing a disservice to the Constitution, to the country, and probably to their own consciences.
You asked at the Times the other day online at nytimes.com, is the president a stooge or a schmuck? Which is it?
Well, it's the $64 billion or trillion dollar question. I think at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. I mean, historians will, and it's possible that he's, of course, both. But whether you it's possible to read all of the president's actions through the lens of a kind of incompetent who has sort of lucked his way into the presidency and is fumbling his way through it with dreadful results for our standing in the world. Or maybe there is a kind of a design at work here and a nefarious design. The results for America and America's standing end up being largely the same.
So what are Americans to do, whether they're Republicans, Democrats, liberals, conservatives?
Well,
you call yourself a disaffected conservative.
I'm a disaffected conservative. Number one, I think, speaking for conservatives, I would tell my fellow conservatives, if all of this were being done, but the president were Barack Obama, what would you say? Simply apply the standards that you would have applied to him to this president. At least be consistent, because I remember Republicans.
That's asking a lot of either side.
It is, but look, at least say to yourself, if 6 or 7 years ago you were in full throat against Barack Obama's reset with Russia, about wanting to make a deal with Vladimir Putin once he'd gotten the 2012 election behind him, apply the same standard with Donald Trump. Now with respect to the Democrats, my point to them is behave not like a resistance, behave like an opposition. And right now we don't have, I don't know what Democratic plans are on taxes, on foreign policy, on any number of issues. And I think Americans are saying, okay, you guys like to go on about how terrible Trump is, fine, we agree, but what's your agenda? And I don't think Democrats have answered that yet.
You say the Republicans have no business running Congress. Does that mean you would support the Democrats running Congress?
Yes, of course. I mean, I think that we would be well served by a Democratic opposition in the majority in Congress. I hope they can operate competently, but the Republicans are simply not a check on the president on some of the issues that used to define the Republican Party. For example, support for free trade.
When you talk about the fact that half-truths are gaining around the world, not just in this country, that they traffic in turning a legitimate issue into an illegitimate end, why is that going on? What makes that happen at this particular time? Is it this free flow of information? Is it the internet? Is it the availability and the ability to spread these half-truths more than ever before?
Well, look, I mean, it's a large question that you're asking, but I think, at least in many respects, part of the answer is that centrist parties refused to address topics that were on people's minds. Take the subject of immigration in Europe. Immigration was very problematic in Europe in many respects long before you had the refugee crisis of 2015. And the parties of the center right and the center left, social democrats, Christian democrats, socialists, Gaullists, and so on, said, well, we're not going to discuss it because even any discussion of it has a kind of a taint of racism or xenophobia. That meant that it created a space for very far right-wing parties to seize the issue as their own. And the trick, I think, that every successful demagogue employs is to take a half-truth. Okay, here's a real problem that the elites are refusing to address, and here's my solution, which usually turns out to be nasty, racist, xenophobic, and so on. When the center makes all sorts of subjects unmentionable, doesn't address them in a serious and coherent way, it becomes catnip for extremists on both sides.
In a way, aren't the Democrats doing the same thing on the Supreme Court nomination of Brett Kavanaugh? Here's a guy you may or may not agree with, but he seems to be a qualified jurist.
Well, and I think that's the standard that we should apply in general. I believe, whatever my other disagreements, Elena Kagan manifestly qualified to be on the Supreme Court. Barack Obama won the election. We should defer to him unless there's some clear proof of moral or intellectual turpitude on her part. And I think the Democrats would be smart to apply the same standard to Kavanaugh. Why? He's been a well-regarded appeals court judge for a dozen years. He's got an impeccable intellectual pedigree. He's not an extremist by Republican standards. And the Supreme Court gains legitimacy and independence when people feel that their side is represented in some fashion on the high court.
Putin aside, you said you were more concerned about the trashing of democratic values from the inside. What do you mean by that?
I mean, take something as basic as immigration. I'm one generation removed from an immigrant. My mother, who arrived here with no skills as a child, a refugee, displaced person from wartime Europe, and now I'm sort of routinely accused of being an elitist. It's a tribute to the success of the American dream.
That you can be an elitist.
For so many of us. So when I see a picture, like the picture of a 3-year-old child who has been held alone in detention by the United States government for a purely capricious reason, which is Jeff Sessions trying to create a deterrent against desperate people from Latin America coming to the United States, I think we're losing a core democratic or a core liberal value. The United States is founded not on race or ethnicity. It's founded on a set of ideals, and those are the ideals that bring us together as Americans. Lincoln talked about it all the way back in 1858. You can go back even further. And what worries me is that we are supplanting that sense of American idealism that doesn't look at race or ethnicity and creating a kind of notion of Americanism, at least on the conservative side, that looks like the ethnocentrism of the National Front in France or other types of groups.
Bret Stephens, thank you so much for joining us, and
Pleasure.
we'll keep reading your column and read you online at nytimes.com. Coming up next, Reclaiming Hart Island with Corey Kilgannon of the Times. Welcome back to the New York Times Close Up. Recently, Times Metro reporter Corey Kilgannon reminded us of a past that continues today. Unclaimed bodies of hundreds of poor people who died of AIDS remain buried in a remote spot on Hart Island, shunned even in death. He joins us with Melinda Hunt, a longtime advocate who's pressing to have Hart Island open to the public. Corey, we know that many people are in Hart Island in unmarked graves, tens of thousands since the 19th century. How did you come across the idea of people with AIDS being buried there, first stigmatized by a disease and then stigmatized by being buried anonymously?
Well, I've written about Hart Island before, and I've always spoken to Melinda about Hart Island. She is the authority on the island. And we were talking about a couple other slightly more newsy aspects of the island, and I was looking online, and I said, what are these pictures of these AIDS graves? And she started to tell me that there were a lot of people who died of AIDS buried on Hart Island, and I started to say, how many? And we started getting into that, and then we started getting into it further and looking at burial rolls and other materials that started giving us, well, Melinda knew, but it started giving me the idea that the numbers may be into the hundreds, maybe even the thousands.
Why did they wind up there?
Well, two populations that were kind of vulnerable for being unclaimed upon death. One is young gay men who came to New York in the 80s and contracted AIDS, and they were maybe disenfranchised from their families and maybe went unclaimed at death, some of them, And then another population of intravenous drug users who also got estranged from families, probably had lives that kind of devolved into the street, and also were prone to being unclaimed upon death. So these were two, and these are both populations that that contracted AIDS more than others.
Hart Island, of course, off City Island in the Bronx. Melinda, you are director of the Hart Island Project. How did you become interested in Hart Island?
Well, I first went to Hart Island with the task of rephotographing Jacob Riis's first photographs on the centennial of his first images. And I was there during the AIDS epidemic, essentially. And the correction officers directed us to a grave site that they said was the first child to die of AIDS in New York City. And so we photographed that. And so that also always stayed with me. It was in a very remote southern part of the island that the public still cannot access. And then in documents, there was a sanitation report from 1985 that listed 16 AIDS victims buried also in this remote area. So I became interested in sort of finding them. And then at the end of April, we flew a drone over Hart Island, and the drone picked up where these burial markers are in this isolated area.
Why were the AIDS patients buried separately?
Because the correction officers were afraid that they might contract AIDS from handling these bodies. And so they buried them 14 feet deep as the backhoe would go, in this isolated area that had previously been a sewage treatment plant.
Corey, I've been out on Hart Island too, and it's sort of a spooky place, one of those forgotten parts of the city. And it is kind of striking when you look back over maybe 150 years, how many poor people, unknown people, lost people, anonymous people are just placed there. Some of them ultimately found, redeemed, but many just placed there and forgotten.
Right. I mean, to the eye, there are fields with white markers here and there placed. You know, once you realize that there are thousands of people buried, mass graves, big long trenches the length of football fields, it definitely gives you another take on the island, which is just would otherwise be an idyllic place surrounded by the Long Island Sound. Just, we would say, off the coast of the Bronx. It's probably a short kayak ride, say, from City Island, which is a very nice place to visit. But there's a million bodies buried on Hart Island.
And they're recycled, aren't they? The graves, the trenches. One of the things I was struck by was when you look back at 1890 when Jacob Riis photographed them and look back now, people are buried almost exactly the same way except for the backhoe.
Yes, the system of burials was actually developed during the Civil War so that they could quickly inter soldiers on the battlefield, because the Civil War, most of it was fought in the South. So the Union Army needed to be able to bury soldiers and then disinter them later and move them to national cemeteries. So this system of burials has been used for 150 years in New York City, and it allows for the city to disinter and return remains to family if they show up later.
You've wanted the city to open this up, make it under the jurisdiction of the Parks Department rather than the Correction Department. What's the city's reaction been to that?
Well, the context is the military does not run the national cemeteries, the National Park Service does. And so Parks Departments traditionally have managed cemeteries, and in New York City, many of the old Potter's Fields are now public parks. So that's the precedent for it. The response is that this Parks Department feels that it's beyond what they can do to bury the dead. But in fact, they're the only agency that really has the capacity to do it, and that is as I said, the precedent in New York City for them to manage the public cemeteries.
Thanks to Corey Kilgannon and Melinda Hunt for joining us. You'll find the complete article online at nytimes.com, Dead of AIDS and Forgotten in Potter's Field. The backstory is next. Welcome back. Helsinki, Brussels, London, all backdrops for our president to step into more than one landmine and then try to retreat. The second time, not the charm for State Senate Majority Leader Dean Skelos. He and his son convicted a second time of corruption. Governor Cuomo has amassed a $31+ million war chest. Now he's turning to supporters for $5 donations. Joining me to discuss these stories and more, my Times colleagues, contributing writer Eleanor Randolph and Albany Bureau Chief Jesse McKinley. We look at the polls and the governor way ahead of his challenger Cynthia Nixon, way ahead in fundraising. Is there anything at all for him to worry about or any other incumbent?
Well, that's a curious question. I mean, if you talk to his camp, obviously they feel very confident. They feel bullish about both the fundraising numbers, as you mentioned, more than 31 million, as well as the polls that show him up by 30, 35 points. Now, having said that, I think there is an argument to be made that, particularly in light of what happened in Queens and the Bronx with Joe Crowley getting beaten by a relative unknown, Ocasio-Cortez, there is a certain argument that the polls may not be picking up what's going on here. That the base of the Democratic Party, that young voters, that new voters are very, very, very fired up, and they may want to take it out on a centrist like Governor Cuomo. Now, that is the argument that's being given by the Nixon campaign. It's being given by people that are fighting the former Independent Democratic Conference. Whether that is true is one thing that we're going to be looking at the paper to try to figure out if there is some way to figure out if that sort of grassroots energy actually translates into votes.
It surprised everybody in Queens in the Crowley race. How do you gauge something like that, particularly statewide, whether it's going to show up in the race for lieutenant governor, in attorney general, in the race against the Democratic rebels who sided with the Republicans in the state Senate? How do you figure that?
You know, I hate to say this, but looking at, I don't think that Andrew Cuomo should be, breaking out the champagne about these polls. Just remember 2016. As Trump was winning, the polls were still showing Hillary Clinton ahead. The one thing
Not that's far ahead.
Yeah, I mean, during the vote, actually, the polls were showing her ahead. So, I mean, I'm not sure we can trust these polls when, as Jesse says, you've got all this enthusiasm coming from the other side. The one thing is that this primary is on a Thursday. It's the 13th and not the 11th for obvious reasons. They didn't want to have it on September the 11th on a Tuesday, but people are not used to voting on Thursday, and so that will mean that the unions that get out the vote will get out the bigger vote. So it's going to be harder to rally those sort of young, enthusiastic troops, I think, for a Thursday.
What is Andrew Cuomo's platform? This was a problem that his father, Mario, ran into when he was running for his last term and lost. There was a sense that there was no vision, that he was running because he was there. He had done a good job in the first terms, and why not keep me? What is Andrew Cuomo's vision for a third term? This is now about a year since he promised to rescue the subways. People probably don't see much improvement. Where does he go from here?
It's a great question. I mean, I think if you listen to his speeches, and I've listened to a lot of them, basically what the two major themes that he strikes again and again and again is, I'm going to fight Washington, I'm going to fight Donald Trump, I'm the man for the job to protect New York, and then simultaneously, look at all this great stuff I've done minimum wage, I've done family leave, I've done same-sex marriage. But the thing that is seemingly missing from that message is, what are you going to do next? And I think third terms in New York politics and in all American politics can be tricky. It's a big ask, to tell voters, look, I've been doing this for 8 years, give me 4 more years to do, well, what? I mean, that becomes the question. And I don't think that Cuomo has completely defined that, and it certainly has not amplified that message to an extent that I'm hearing it or other people are really hearing it. Now, as Eleanor was saying, he's up 36 points. That's a pretty big mountain to climb. But I would say that, you listen to what they're saying on the ground, what you see on places like Twitter, weirdly enough, in places in social media. When I, for instance, tweet something about Cynthia Nixon, you'll get 100, 200, 300, 400 likes almost instantaneously. People are really tapped in. Whereas if I say something about the governor, 1, 2, 3, 4. People really do seem enthusiastic about Cynthia Nixon's candidacy. Now, once again, is it 36 points worth of enthusiasm to make up those polls? I'm not going to make that bet.
What about the ethics convictions, corruption convictions involving the governor's staff, not the governor himself, friends of the governor, supporters of the governor, and of course coupled with the reconvictions of Sheldon Silver, the former Assembly Speaker, Dean Skelos, the former Senate Majority Leader. Is that a cloud that hangs over the election at all, or are people now inured to that and thinks that's just the way Albany does business?
That's the question that we've dealt with for a very long time, Sam. I mean, whether people care about the sort of the intrinsic corruption there in Albany. It's interesting that that Cuomo has always seemed to separate himself from this corruption. Although if you go back to the Moreland Commission, which he canceled, and you had lots of questions, I think that the harder thing for him to deal with is, like, if you're talking about all this money, and you were saying that all these people are now coming up with $1 and $5 donations. There's a kind of trickiness, a political sort of, I'm smarter than you are, and I can sort of get around the stuff that you think you care about. So,
well, we'll see. Thanks to Eleanor Randolph, Jesse McKinley for joining us, and I'll offer some additional thoughts on Coda. I just returned from Jerusalem in Germany, where William Faulkner's adage about history is reverberating in current events. The past is never dead, Faulkner famously wrote. It's not even past. The issue was a recent law passed by Poland. It criminalized any implication that Poles were complicit in the mass murder of Jews during World War II. The Poles are right about one thing. Referring to Polish concentration camps is wrong. Many of the camps were located in Poland, but they were run by German Nazis. Also, thousands of Poles were cited as righteous for risking their lives to rescue Jews during the war. Under pressure, the government eliminated the law's criminal penalties for threatening Polish sensitivities. But to leave scholars or anyone else vulnerable to civil damages for that vague offense defies William Faulkner. It buries the past, dead or not. A joint statement by the Poles and Israelis recognized the, quote, cruelty that certain people displayed toward Jews. But many Holocaust historians complained that the statement fell short of an honest reckoning on Poland's part. Contrast that with Germany. Chancellor Merkel refused specific comment on the Polish law, but said flatly, quote, we as Germans are responsible for what happened during the Holocaust. I visited the German History Museum in Berlin. You could fault some euphemisms and say too much blame was placed on Nazis and not Germans, but the exhibits unequivocally acknowledged that in 1941, quote, the decision was taken to murder all Jews in the German sphere of influence, that their confiscated assets enriched non-Jewish businesses, banks, and private citizens, that the Jews were deported not in the dead of night, but before the eyes of the public, and that 6 million were murdered in a Nazi genocide. Incidentally, the exhibit also points out that in 1938, Germany expelled thousands of Polish Jews, but Poland refused to admit them. Napoleon cynically described history as a set of lies agreed upon. But revisionism and reinterpretation is one thing. Negationism is another. He who controls the past controls the future, George Orwell wrote. He who controls the present controls the past. For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts.